Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. So this will be the second to last video that I will do for the Scooby-Doo readathon. This will be my last two quick reviews on the last two prompts that I have completed. And then I will do another video wrapping everything up as sort of a end summary, I guess, if you will. So the last two prompts that I did was prompt 2, which was Shaggy, to read a book in your best friend's genre, and then number 7, which was Mystery Machine, to read the group book. So I have kind of done this out of order. When I first started this, when I first started these two prompts, I was originally starting with the Mystery Machine, and I got about halfway through the book Meddling Kids, which was for the group read, and honestly was so very bored that I went outside of my norm and I put it aside temporarily and I started reading the other book. Originally for that one, I was going to read Woman 99, but I just wasn't feeling it at that exact time. So I opted to read another book that or another one that Nikki really enjoyed. So I decided to read Rebecca. I can't pronounce the last name for the author, or I can't pronounce the author's name, so I think it's Daphne, and then I can't pronounce the last of it, so I'm not going to try. But I'll leave it up in the images, as you can tell, and I'll list it down below if necessary. But so I decided to read that one first, and so I dove into that one, and I'll try and keep these summaries as spoiler free as I can for those of you who have never read any of them, or either of them rather. So reading that one, it started off just a little bit slow for me, but it wasn't too long into the book, I'd say after the first couple of chapters, that I was hooked and didn't realize I was hooked. But it was kind of one of those, you couldn't put it down. Like, you were constant, as soon as you stopped reading it or listening to it, as I did it through audiobook, your mind couldn't seem to get away from the story and, what's going to happen next. It really left me on the edge of my seat. It hooked me pretty good. It's, someone asked me what kind of book this is, and that's kind of a hard way to describe. I mean, it's listed under a romance story, or a romance novel, but it's kind of hard to describe because it's got romance pieces in it. It's got mystery. It has intrigue. So it's a good mixture of genres, really. It really left me on the edge of my seat, constantly wondering what was going to happen, always waiting for the next shoe to drop, something to happen. So it follows a woman who is retelling a story. So, she starts off, she's got memories and she's going back into her life and she's remembering her life, and that's how she's retelling it, as a past memory. So you follow her through this life story and how she goes from being a companion to an older woman or being a companion for an older woman. And then she ends up, with a stroke of luck, she ends up meeting a gentleman, and this is set sort of in an old-fashioned setting. So where I think the closest comparison, although I've never read it, I just know of it, the closest comparison and setting I can think of would be Pride and Prejudice, or if anyone has seen the movie The Duchess, similar setting to that, in terms of how they dress, how they interact. Maybe not necessarily in terms of the gowns and things, but it's the environment and how they interact and how they associate with one another and the different classes that all come into play. So you go from, like I said, she is a companion to an older woman, and then she ends up meeting a gentleman, and for a lack of a better way to put it, he ends up courting her. It's going for drives and subtle things. It's small conversation, it's small dinners, nothing outright romantic in what we would be used to. a lot of romance novels that I've read in the past, and it always goes, right for the end. Like it's usually romantically graphic, where everything has been upfront and personal. Where this one, it was very subtle. Any real intimacy that there could have been wasn't really included in the story. So it's an old fashioned type romance, I guess. So he ends up courting her, and then um, he ends up, proposing, and then they move on to, getting married. And then as life goes on, she discovers that there's more to this man's story and background and the history and where they end up living, and that there's a whole um, there's a lot of history to it. And she ends up being basically thrown into this world. She basically goes from like middle class type thing to upper class all of a sudden. And she's surrounded by servants in a giant manor and has no idea how to go about living her life, doesn't know how to interact, doesn't know what to expect, what people are supposed to expect from her, as she goes from almost a service position to a woman of power. So it's quite an interesting story watching the transition from one to the other. And I don't know. Um, there's lots of it that I didn't like. There's lots of it that I really did like. There was definitely some moments in there that had me chuckling. So there's no one way to describe the book and the story. I can say though that the ending really ticked me off. I really didn't like how it ended, and as I read it or listened to it through audiobook, at first I thought maybe my audiobook had been cut off wrong. And then after finding the ebook and doing some exploration to find out that it was accurate. So I really didn't like how the ending was done. It was cut off in such a way that it left you with more questions than I would have liked. It actually took me looking up to see if there was a sequel to it and reading and finding out that there is, and reading the blurb on the sequel to confirm my suspicions for the end, or at least part of it. But so much was left unexplained in the end. And I mean, for that, I really wasn't exactly happy with it. I'm hoping the sequel picks up where it left off. But one will only know once I get to it, which could be a little bit, as I have a long list of books I'd like to read probably before that. But overall, it was a fairly good story. It really hooked me in. It was really good, and it was good. So that one I read for the Shaggy prompt, which is number 2. And again, that was to read a book in your best friend's genre. And then the last prompt, number 7, Mystery Machine. I did go back to finishing Meddling Kids after I finished Rebecca, and I picked up roughly where I left off and finished it off. And I have to say, so the first half of the book, really boring. When we got to that point, and the last half of the book wasn't that bad, but you had to survive the first half of the book to get to the end of it. I like the concept of this book. There were so many good ideas. There was so many concepts that were thrown together, and I think that's the problem. There were all these concepts weren't totally thought all the way through. They were just kind of thrown together in a jumbled mess, and they weren't very well organized. The relationships weren't developed well enough for me. The connections between these people weren't developed well enough for me. The background story leading up to the current events wasn't well enough for me. Honestly, it disappointed me because of the fact that this book is based on the kid cartoon Scooby-Doo. If I was a novice coming in, a teenager type thing reading this book, they might be okay with it because they may not be as well read as some of us are, myself included. So, from that perspective, it might be okay. But from someone who's read a lot of books and more specifically who's watched a decent amount of horror movies, to walk into my first real book mystery of sorts. It really left me, I don't know, disappointed. Um, like I said, it didn't really pick up and pull my interest in until like the last half of the book. And that was, toward the end when, things are finally starting to happen. Um, there were, some humor bits that I enjoyed. I did enjoy the little bits of scientific info that was thrown in there. Like I said, I liked all the different concepts and the ideas in the book. I just think it was poorly developed and poorly put together. So, if there are more books like this, I'm hoping that it gets better in the future and that maybe they just put a little bit more thought and time into it. But yeah, I mean, even the ending, I don't know. It just, I don't know. It needed work, I guess. So I won't say that, I definitely don't hate the book. It's just definitely wasn't my favorite. Um, so anyway, so those are now done. So for the Scooby-Doo readathon, that was prompt 7 and prompt 2. And as of this point, that completes all of the different prompts. There were 7 different prompts. The idea was to read, the bonus one was to read one book per prompt, and I have done that. So as of this point, I have read 7 different books for 7 different prompts. And I will do another video running them all down as just a bit of a Scooby-Doo readathon wrap up. So thank you again for listening and watching my channel. I greatly appreciate your support for those of you who have been supporting me this far. For those of you who are new, I welcome you to my channel, and I greatly appreciate you checking this out, and I hope you like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much.